On this episode of the China Unscripted podcast, the Chinese Communist Party is infiltrating college campuses around the world, and it's being done in the name of Confucius. But is the tide turning against the Confucius Institute? Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
Joining us today is Doris Liu, the producer, writer, and director of the award-winning documentary In the Name of Confucius about China's Confucius Institutes. Doris, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. So for people who may not be familiar with the Confucius Institute, what is it?
On the surface, Confucius Institutes, it's a brand name. I would say brand name that the Chinese government invented or initiated back in 2004, which is the Chinese language and cultural education program. But that program is established in foreign universities and school boards, such as in the United States. So it's like a partnership between the Chinese government and the foreign educational institutions. And in rare cases, that partnership is between a Chinese government and a foreign government. So you think about the Confucius Institutes as a Chinese government's language and cultural program, but set up not in Chinese schools, but in your schools outside of China.
So what makes it different than the Goethe Institute or the Alliance Française, like the other language learning institutes set up by foreign governments?
Right, that's a very good question. A lot of people confused about the differences between the Confucius Institutes and the other cultural institutes you just named, Shelley. The major differences between the two kind of programs or institutes are, one, Confucius Institutes are totally or 100% controlled by the Chinese government, whereas the other institutes, they are independent from their own governments, although they both get funding from their own governments. So that's number one difference. And the number two is Confucius Institutes, as I said, they are attached to or embedded in or you can say just and becoming part of a foreign universities or schools. So they are part of the foreign universities. They do not have their own premise in foreign in foreign countries. So, but the other institutes, they run independently outside of their own country, such as Goethe Institute. They run their own office in Canada or in America. They're not attempting to attach themselves to an established foreign, educational institutions. So those are the major two differences. And I believe, and as many as other critics or other China analysts who know about Confucius Institutes, we all believe this attached to model of the Confucius Institutes are strategically chosen by the Chinese government after studying the models run by the other cultural institutions you just mentioned. They found out they have to attach themselves to the foreign universities so that the Chinese government have a leverage to influence the foreign universities and school boards.
What is the Chinese Communist Party using the Confucius Institute for?
To put it in the Chinese Communist Party's own language, they describe the Confucius Institutes as an important part of China's overseas propaganda setup. Of course, here China doesn't mean the nation or the people, but specifically it means the Chinese Communist Party. And that statement was given by the former propaganda head of the Chinese Communist Party, whose name is Li Changchun. He said that back in 2007 when he was inspecting the Confucius Institute's headquarters in Beijing. So you have an idea what kind of activities that the Chinese Communist Party could use Confucius Institutes to uh, to propaganda and censorship, to try to portray the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government as friendly, as benign as it actually isn't.
Now, when I was in college, I took Mandarin, and this is 2003 or so. This is before the Confucius Institutes. I had a great time. I was learned a lot of Chinese and Chinese culture. So, what's different about what you get from the Confucius Institute versus the kind of maybe traditional Chinese language class I got at Pomona University?
Right. I'll give you one example. If you are school kids, like university or college kids, learning Chinese language and culture from the Confucius Institute, you probably will sing a song that praised the great leader Mao Zedong or the great Communist Party while you were trying to celebrate the Chinese New Year, such as the song that was sang by the Canadian university students in Waterloo.
I assume it's about how great Mao Zedong was at killing people. He was very, very good at that.
Yes, of course. Just in the Great Leap Forward, that political campaign itself, or we know it for Great Farming. Yeah, that political campaign, Mao Zedong killed, or roughly between 3 million and 4 million Chinese people. Sorry, I gave the wrong number. It's not 3 million, it's 30 million. Between 30 million and 40 million Chinese people died from hunger, from famine in that political campaign alone. And there's many other political campaigns after 1949 when the Chinese Communist Party took power of China.
So I'm guessing the Confucius Institute emphasizes only the greatness without the specifics of the actual things that Mao did to the Chinese people.
Yeah, if you have basic understanding of propaganda, by the definition of the Chinese Communist Party, you probably have a good idea what kind of materials, content, and teaching you will get from the from the Confucius Institute. But of course, the Confucius Institutes would not do the so-called education the same way as any Chinese university would do to Chinese people itself. Because like I was born and grown up in China, and I grown up singing songs like that. I just give you that example. Also, we have to take the so-called political thoughts or current affairs, anything related to politics. We have to write text each semester. So failing the political tests, you would not advance to a next grade. So that's what the so-called education we accepted in China. That's just purely brainwash.
I have a question about these political tests, because at the end of the semester, everyone takes a test, right, on the material they learned.
Yeah.
So what's a political test versus is that different than a regular academic test?
The content is purely about the politics, and you have to write those answers politically correct by the definition of the Chinese Communist Party. For example, you have to praise the Chinese Communist Party as a great leader of China, as accurate. They took accurate actions to deal with China's issues. Well, in the reality, it doesn't, right? It doesn't. But you have to say that, and you have to learn the so-called theories. Like in my days, I remember we had to learn about like Jiang Zemin's three representatives. Those, so-called very boring political theories. We have to learn that. No matter you are primary school kid, high school, or university or school or colleges, you all have to learn such things, which we find very boring, but you have to write the test right. You have to at least get 60 score out of 100 mark. So that's what we do.
So as long as you get 2 out of 3 of Jiang Zemin's 3 represents, then you're good.
Of course, there are a lot of other theories and content. I forgot. I forgot. I can only remember 3 representatives. I would imagine now the students in China, they would have to learn about Xi Jinping's One Belt, One Road initiative and a lot of the current theories invented by the CCP. Yeah.
Like Xi Jinping thought on socialism for a new era.
With Chinese characteristics.
Yeah.
For a new era.
Yeah.
And did it? Have we all forgotten about Hu Jintao's scientific development?
I think we have. Yeah.
I just want to
Hu
point
Jintao's
out
was not as catchy.
I graduated already in Hu Jintao's time, so
It's okay. We've all forgotten about Hu Jintao.
I didn't have to learn about Hu Jintao's theory, but back then I spent 4 years in working in a Chinese university in Southwest China. And guess what my role is? What my position is? You guys have a wild guess.
Warlord.
No.
I was gonna go teacher, but okay, warlord, sure.
Head of diversity and inclusion.
There's no such definition of inclusion in China. So, okay, my role in the university, in the Chinese university, was, if translated word for word, political tutor.
Huh.
Political tutor. You don't have anything like counterpart in any Western democratic countries. It's like, yeah. Now the American government is under Republican Party, right? Republican. So imagine in all American universities, you have a lecturer position called Republican politics tutor, who will dedicate his time in indoctrinating American students about the Republicans' political thoughts, political correctness. Or in previous presidency, it's under Democratic Party. So you imagine all American kids, no matter primary school, high school, universities, you have to learn.
Yeah, you know what? I like it. I think we'll call it Donald Trump thought on capitalism with American characteristics for a new era.
Yeah. So now, while I was doing research recently, I found it's astonishing. It's amazing. Some of the Confucius Institutes, they teach not kids, their students or the staff working at the Confucius Institutes. The 19th CCP's National Congress, they would watch the opening ceremony and they would study Xi Jinping's speech, opening remarks.
Wow, that sounds really boring.
It's boring, but they do that at Confucius Institutes. It's just I was very surprised to see that.
Wait, are you saying that, like, at these universities in America or Canada or wherever, the staff of the Confucius Institute has to sit and watch the Communist Party, congresses and learn from Xi Jinping's speeches?
That could happen, although I haven't found any Confucius Institutes in the United States or Canada have done such. Of course, I didn't do research to each and every Confucius Institutes in the 2 countries, but I found that in some Asian countries, European countries, especially in recent years, while Xi Jinping has been pushing his One Belt, One Road initiative, those countries who joined this One Belt, One Road, and those countries who are interested in this initiative, they probably will will watch the 19th or 18th CCP's National Congress or studying the Xi Jinping opening remark. That could happen. Yeah, imagine those countries. I think those, let's say host university, okay, those foreign universities who are hosting a Confucius Institute, they, of course, they have basic understanding about the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government. But I think they try to downplay the bad side of the Confucius Institutes and trying to boost the advantages or values, so-called values of having those Confucius Institutes. That means they know once they open their doors to the Chinese Communist Party's Confucius Institutes, there are chance the propaganda materials could come in the form of textbooks, in the form of Chinese instructors teaching. But they think they probably could take control. They can vet materials. In fact, a lot of cases they fail to vet the materials because while we do the research, we found a lot of propaganda elements in the textbooks alone, let alone the Chinese instructors. They're living their live propaganda, agents of the CCP. So a lot of the host universities, they still use the textbooks or books provided by the Chinese Communist government. Of course, as I said, in the Confucius Institutes, you will not see as condensed propaganda materials as we would see in China's universities, right? So there could be a song or just 1%, just for example, 1% of a textbook contains propaganda, contains the CCP's propaganda. And it's in the form of songs, Chinese songs, or Chinese movie, or so-called Chinese poet, all those contemporary, literacies. And so it's very hard for the host universities or schools to identify those CCP propaganda materials, content from the teaching materials. So they failed to do that. And propaganda is just one problem with the Confucius Institutes. I would say a bigger problem is censorship and self-censorship. And we have found, if you just Google criticisms to Confucius Institutes or Confucius Institute's controversies, and you will find a Wikipedia page and a long page, very long page, full of all kinds of controversies or incidents happened at the Confucius Institutes where you found a Dalai Lama speech was cancelled, or an art exhibition about the Falun Gong, the persecuted religious group or belief group in China, was cancelled by the host university under the pressure of the local Chinese embassies or consulates, because they fear about losing money to the Confucius Institutes or any cooperations program, exchange program with the Chinese government. They fear about losing money if they do things, planning activities or events that the Chinese government doesn't like. And also the screening of my film was interfered in some parts of the world. In some cases, the Chinese government succeeded in canceling a screening of my film. In some cases, the Chinese government failed. So I would say the censorship issue is a bigger problem comparing to propaganda.
One of the things that in the name of Confucius I thought was fascinating is the interview that you did with the was it Coquitlam? I don't know how to say that quite right.
Right. Yeah, quickly.
The school district that had just recently gotten a Confucius Institute, and it was funny because they obviously thought that you were like pro Confucius Institutes because they were bragging about getting like $1 million worth of free textbooks from the Confucius Institutes. Or one thing that they said that was fascinating was the whole idea that something about how being positioned to have more Chinese students come to their district, or to be like that it gives them an advantage in the secondary school market in China, something like that. I thought it was
Right.
really fascinating because I hadn't really considered that angle of it before, like how the Confucius Institutes could help these universities or schools get more money from China in terms of international students.
Right. You mentioned a very good angle, Shelley. A lot of people think about Confucius Institutes as bringing Chinese language program with money, textbooks, and teacher from China to the host universities and schools. That's the very direct or on the surface, a superficial advantages or goodness they can get from this partnership. And beyond that, that immediately the host universities or schools, even in the school board from K to 12 students, they can have probably more Chinese international students coming from China to their campus. Just because you have a Confucius Institute and then you have a good relationship with the Chinese government, and then you have better chance to marketing yourself inside China, getting more students from China to your school, and Chinese students means a lot of money coming from them, tuition fees, right? And we all know nowadays the Chinese international students, in many cases, they contribute more than half of the revenues foreign universities could get from international students, right? So that's a lot money, and the Chinese students have a lot of weight on the what the decisions or the intercourse going on the foreign campuses. So that's also um, the Chinese government could have another leverage to interfere and influence the academic freedom of the foreign universities. So that's the second so-called value or advantages. The foreign schools could get out from the Confucius Institutes. And even beyond that, think about the Confucius Institutes, they do not limit their influence within that university or school board boundaries. They're trying to expand their influence. Like they will have Chinese language activities. For example, when we celebrate Chinese New Year or a lunar, uh, like Mid Autumn Festival, the Moon Festival, the traditional Chinese festivals. If you want to celebrate that, a lot of times Confucius Institutes will go into local communities. I mean, outside of the university and school boards, they will do events with local peoples, and that's when they can bridge the relationship between Chinese government and the local community, and also portray the Chinese government in a more uh, friendly way, and also the local governments, not only the schools, the local governments could benefit from that Confucius Institutes or Confucius schools. Um, that means they can have better relationship with the Chinese government, and also then they can have better marketing opportunities inside China. Like what I know from my trip to to Germany last year, a lot of the German Confucius Institutes, they have 19 now. No, sorry, they have 18. One was closed earlier this year. So Germany has currently 18 Confucius Institutes, and some of them was established with the decision of local German government. For example, in Hamburg city municipal government was approached by the Berlin's Chinese embassy with this idea of opening the Confucius Institute in Hamburg, the city of Hamburg. And the municipal government thought it was a great idea. They decided. Then they need to find a university to host. Then they went to Hamburg University. And Hamburg University decided, yes, we were going to host. Because even if we didn't, of course, the Hamburg University had some hesitation or concerns initially, but they thought if we were not to host this Confucius Institute, the municipal government would go to another university anyway. That could be even worse. So they decided, okay, let's host the Confucius Institute. Maybe we could manage this partnership better. So local government, Hamburg government, then can have better interaction with the Chinese government. You can imagine the municipal or provincial in the United States, it's state government, right? Or even federal government in some cases. They could send a delegate to visit China, and you wanted to learn some Chinese language. And sometimes I found the governments went to a Confucius Institute to learn Chinese language. And the Confucius Institute would also help them to maybe to plan their China visit. At least the Confucius Institute will help the foreign governments or business. Sometimes it's a business enterprises to bridge their relationship to China or find them our Chinese host. So that are the roles that Confucius Institute could play in the local community. I mean, in foreign countries. So that's the opportunities that where the communist Chinese government could exert its influence, and also do some espionage activities.
One thing that I noticed about looking at the list of Confucius Institutes in the US, some of them were at very prestigious universities like Stanford, for example.
Right.
But there were also like really small universities or colleges that had Confucius Institutes, like the School of Optometry at the State University of New York. What is the value of having Confucius Institutes at, some of these like smaller places? If Confucius Institutes can help, the Chinese government or Chinese Communist Party get an in with local governments or state governments, but like, what's the point of having one at like a School of Optometry?
The Chinese Communist Party, the eyes on influencing the whole world. No matter big, very prestigious universities like Stanford, or very small town like the town you just mentioned, there's nothing to lose for the Chinese Communist Party by trying to influence the people of the world. So as long as they can find a host, they will establish a Confucius Institute or Confucius classroom. But that doesn't mean the Chinese government doesn't have any strategy to grow its Confucius Institute worldwide. I believe at first the Chinese Communist Party approached to those more prestigious universities around the world, like the top 3 university in Canada, which is located in Vancouver. It's University of British Columbia, UBC in short. UBC was approached as early as 2004 and 2005. It entered into a negotiation. Almost the Confucius Institute would be established on campus, but it broke. The negotiation was broken. And after that, the Chinese government, from different angles, approached UBC for another 3 or 4 times throughout the years. But UBC rejected or didn't pick up the idea anyway. And at the same time, while the Chinese government couldn't get its Confucius Institutes into this very prestigious Canadian university, they know Vancouver is an important strategic spot, a city. Then the Chinese government went to another university in the city. It's not that prestigious, of course. They got that university. They successfully opened the Confucius Institutes on another university in Vancouver, and through that CI in Vancouver, they set up some smaller Confucius Institutes and smaller Confucius classrooms in other smaller, very small Canadian cities or towns. So, I mean, at first, those prestigious universities around the world, they are hesitating or they have more concerns of opening a Confucius Institute, more concerns of having this close ties with the Chinese government. So the Chinese government reached out to some maybe secondary or third tier universities. After a few years, I would say after a couple of years, the Chinese government, the Communist Party, was successful in opening Confucius Institutes in a lot of universities, maybe not that prestigious universities around the world. And then it became, back in 2006 and 2007, having a Confucius Institute on campus was seen by the higher education community as a good thing. They can have better outcome than the bad things coming out from the Confucius Institutes. Then that's when we started to see more prestigious universities starting to embrace this partnership with the Chinese government. And then we see Stanford, Columbia, and in Canada we have Waterloo University and Carleton University and McMaster. They are good universities in Canada. So they started to open Confucius Institutes. But then after a few more years, when the Confucius Institutes expanded very rapidly in the speed, in every 5 and 6 days, there was a new Confucius Institute popping up somewhere in the world. Then we started to see incidents where, Dalai Lama's speech was canceled or Falun Gong art exhibition was canceled, all those incidents popping up because they have more Confucius Institutes. And the bad things starting to happen. Now, until 2013, when the first university in the world, reportedly the first university in the world, closed the Confucius Institute in Canada. That was a Canadian university. So that's when the whole world began to suddenly reflect their relationship with the Confucius Institutes. And then after that, we started to see more and more universities around the world, mostly in the United States, some in Europe, starting to close Confucius Institutes until recent couple years. In America alone, we saw over 30 universities just in the past 2 years. Over 30 universities in America have closed Confucius Institutes.
Well, so what do you think the latest actions by the Trump administration having Confucius Institutes be labeled as what is the term, foreign missions?
Yeah.
What is that? How is that going to impact Confucius Institutes?
So first, to clarify, the Trump administration designate Confucius Institute U.S. Center. That is just an office or a department. You can see it's just a center. It's not. It doesn't mean all the Confucius Institutes were designated as foreign mission, but just that office or that center was designated as foreign mission of the PRC, the People's Republic of China. That center was established in 2013, just the end of the year when we saw the first closure of Confucius Institutes in the world. And that center is responsible in managing, I would say, coordinating all the Confucius Institutes. Back then, there would be over 100 Confucius Institutes and a few hundred Confucius classrooms in the United States. So that U.S. Center, which was designated as foreign mission, is responsible to coordinate all these Confucius Institutes and classrooms in the United States and to do the PR things to promote the brand name of Confucius Institutes, to promote this program. This recent designation of the Confucius Institute U.S. Center as foreign mission for the PRC was very significant because that was the first time the United States, the government of the United States, clarified the nature of at least that center as a representative of the Chinese Communist government, which is not the Chinese government said itself. The Confucius Institute is a non-for-profit organization. The Chinese government sort of portrayed the Confucius Institutes as non-for-profit and not something directly from the Chinese government. They wanted to do that. But this recent movement, the announcement, clarified that nature of the Confucius Institute, and it's a no to the Chinese government, because only a month earlier, before this announcement, the Chinese government just established a new department under Education Ministry, and they founded so-called non-official foundation to run Confucius Institute worldwide. And the purpose for the Chinese government to do that, I believe, one major thinking behind that move by the Chinese government was they're trying to downplay the close connection between the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, and the Confucius Institute program.
So it's basically like a rebranding, right? To make it seem like it's Confucius is run by a different organization.
Yeah, you could say rebranding. But it's not that significant. I don't think that move will change the situation in the United States at all, because a month later, we saw this designation of this U.S. Center as foreign mission, right? That's kind of answer to the Chinese Communist Party's move to the so-called rebranding of CI.
I guess it's kind of like, when Huawei says we're a totally private company with no, we don't have to do what the Chinese government says.
Yes.
But then like the US government is like,
no. Yes. It's just the same thing, I think. And then the only difference is Huawei itself on surface, it's a private owned company, at least on surface. But even on surface, the Confucius Institute is not private owned. Before this rebranding, even after this rebranding, the Confucius Institutes are 100% funded and controlled by the Chinese government. Before this new move, Confucius Institutes was run or overseen by an office called Han Ban. Han means China, Ban means office. It's a short name of the Office of Chinese Language Education International. That office is under Education Ministry. Yeah, it's purely a PRC governed entity. It just embedded in foreign universities, right? So it's very similar to the issue of Huawei, but it's even worse. I mean, in the case of CI is directly controlled by the Communist Chinese Party, right? So I don't think this will change anything happened in the United States at all. It's just give the host universities some excuse to defend their partnership with the Confucius Institutes. Yeah, the rebranding. They will say it's not Chinese government. It's a non-official education program. They would say that. But we all know in China there's no such thing as private, like pure private in real sense. Everything in China, every entity in China, every organizations in China is eventually controlled by the Chinese Communist Party.
Do you think that whole issue and the nature of the Confucius Institutes is becoming more clear to people now? One of the things that you covered in the movie, in your movie, was the fight in the Toronto School Board over the Confucius Institute. And I had never thought that I could be so fascinated by a school board meeting. But, people were really there were protests outside, like people were making these like really passionate speeches. But it seemed like some people kind of understood what was happening with Confucius Institutes and other people were like, it's harmless. Do you think these latest moves by the U.S. government and the closure of some of these Confucius Institutes means that people are starting to realize that it's not so simple?
Yes, I think the recent move by the United States is definitely helping this situation, helping raise this awareness and clarify the nature of the Confucius Institutes. A lot more people will recognize now or realize now the Confucius Institutes are from the Chinese Communist Party and controlled by them and representing and work for the interest of for the Chinese government. But of course, there are always people who prefer to think Confucius Institutes only as teaching Chinese language and culture. No matter how many evidences shown prove that the Confucius Institutes are not only teaching Chinese language and distorted culture, I would say, because it's not authentic Chinese culture. A lot of the so-called culture taught in the Confucius Institutes are distorted by the pure angle perspective of Chinese Communist Party's perspective. So, but still some people would only think CI as teaching language. I would think those people, in the end of the day, there are still people think CI as such, but more people will change their mind. And I think, and I also have seen the tide has turned against the Confucius Institutes. As recently, I saw an article in Foreign Policy written by Australian professor, university professor, which but in the title he calls all the university around the world to close its Confucius Institute. That's very direct, very bold message sent out. And also in some of the other countries, not only in the United States, like in Australia, like in Sweden, or even Germany, they started to look more seriously into the Confucius Institutes. Their media have more coverage, and even in their state parliament, there was debate or hearing over Confucius Institutes. We saw more closures and more concerns being expressed by people in more countries.
Well, so it sounds like the Chinese Communist Party has done a lot of bad things in the name of Confucius.
I believe so. If we really, because a lot of things are done quietly, so there's no media coverage, or unless you know a person who has the insights, then you know what's going on, really going on in the Confucius Institutes. Otherwise, with those we have known, I believe it's only a tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, and I think that's why your documentary, In the Name of Confucius, is so important, because it really highlights this and the controversy and the specific problems with the self-censorship that you had brought up in this interview. So if people want to watch In the Name of Confucius, how can they watch it?
They can find Confucius Institute, In the Name of Confucius, on Vimeo, Amazon Premiere, on Amazon, and YouTube. So YouTube movie. It's recently released on YouTube movie, and we are going to release it on iTunes, Google Play, and haven't finished that process yet, but we'll be releasing on those platforms. So if people wanted to know more information about the Confucius Institutes, and more broadly about the Chinese Communist Party's influence and infiltration, and you could keep an eye on the Facebook page and website and Twitter of the my not personal, but the film's Facebook page and the website.
I definitely recommend In the Name of Confucius. It's a fantastic documentary. Doris, thank you so much for joining us today and really playing a big role in getting the word out about the Confucius Institutes.
Thanks, Grace, Shirley, and Matt.
All right,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks. You know, really, after listening to Doris explain the Confucius Institute, I realize it's just like another part of China's unrestricted warfare.
How so?
Well, so unrestricted warfare, the whole idea is that is like if China were to invade, say, the United States with tanks and soldiers, people would freak out and fight back, obviously. So what they do is they infiltrate quietly using money instead of tanks to invade. And like how she was talking about how, university campuses, the prestigious ones might like not initially want a Confucius Institute, but then they go to some, second or third tier college and it's like, oh, all this money from the promise of like Chinese international students coming in. And so then like suddenly these campuses are now dependent on this money. And so are they going to risk that money by, say, having the Dalai Lama come to campus or by having some exhibition about the Tiananmen Square massacre or Falun Gong? And so if China invaded and forced schools not to talk about, say, Falun Gong, people would freak out. But if they invade with money and then the risk of losing that money, then they get to censor people.
I mean, this is the advantage of the U.S. and other Western countries helping China get rich, is that they now can invade us with money instead of tanks.
So we made them rich, and now they make us rich.
Well, I think, or at
Yeah.
least they make some people rich. I think what is also interesting about targeting these second or third tier universities is that, a lot of more prestigious universities, they already have some kind of Chinese language department
And are already dependent on Chinese international students largely.
Well, even before that, because 2004, that there weren't as many Chinese international students. That's really been something that's in the last decade or so become like a huge thing. But yeah, in 2004, there weren't a lot of Chinese international students. I mean, there's definitely were some, but it wasn't like this like money making machine. It now is with like people forging college entrance essays and like taking the SATs for people. Like there's a whole industry built around getting Chinese students to the U.S. and to some of these often second and third tier universities.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot has changed since 2004. I mean, I used to have a flip phone, Shelley.
Oh gosh.
What
Yeah.
bothers me most is you said 2004, and it's only been in the past decade, and then I realized 2004 is more than a decade ago.
Yeah, it's
Oh, I know.
Chris.
'Cause when I took Mandarin in college, firstly like it wasn't that common to have Mandarin programs. So I went to Harvey Mudd College, and then I had to go to a different but connected college, Pomona, to actually take those classes, just because like most colleges wouldn't offer them. And I think it wasn't so clear yet in the early 2000s just how important China was going to be.
No, I think there was already a lot of the you need to learn Chinese.
I knew it, Shelley.
Okay.
But most people didn't know it.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. But at any rate, like, and my department was run actually by a Taiwanese woman, with like a very traditional Taiwanese person. And she didn't particularly like the Chinese Communist Party. That's understandable.
And that's actually a good point. Like, the more the Chinese Communist Party funds Chinese language and learning programs, the more that edges out Taiwan or Taiwanese teachers.
Or people who just
Yeah.
would talk about some of these more controversial things.
Yeah, I mean, she wasn't like explicitly anti-communist party. It's just that like she promoted traditional culture and she wanted traditional characters. She thought it was better to learn those first, and then you could switch to simplified later. And she felt that also it was important to be able to talk about whatever topics you wanted, including controversial issues, if that came up in the class. Like, it was totally fine. No one at the time was saying like you couldn't talk about the Tiananmen Square massacre in class. Like it didn't feel like there was any restrictions on that.
South China Sea, the Taiwan issue.
I mean, what was happening in the South China Sea in 2004? There's
True.
not, this is a long time ago we're talking
right.
about. I mean,
wow.
they were very forward thinking about the Confucius Institutes. I mean, my university didn't let one come in because it had a very well funded, Asian studies program already. But like, I think, even like Columbia has one. It's just, it's just so, attractive. The idea that like you get free materials, free teachers.
Mm-hmm.
All you have to give is classroom space.
Plus the promise of international students, plus the impact, as Doris was talking about, the impact it can have in many small college communities.
Yeah,
and that gets the local governments involved.
We didn't even talk about this, but I know that like a lot of administrators for universities have gone to China to as part of the whole Confucius Institute thing. They get like free trips to China.
Those free trips to China.
Yeah, they'll get you every time.
Or what they do is that you have to buy your own plane ticket, but then everything else in China is funded by like maybe it'll be some business that's not technically the Communist Party. So it's like it's not so clear how it's funded.
Yeah, often there's another university involved, so like maybe your partner university that's
Right.
going to send you the teachers from the Confucius Institute for the Confucius Institute or whatever will host you in China. And then that's not a government thing. That's just like
It's a totally
university
private
to university
university.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's really brilliant 21st century warfare.
I mean,
Yeah.
I was
mean, the
just
money thing is good. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Shelley.
Well, I was just thinking, like, it can be so much more subtle than just the money thing, too, because there's also, when you have these teachers coming from China who are, trained to dodge certain sensitive topics or whatever. I remember.
There's no war in Ba Sing Se.
Well, I remember as, in high school, this is not Confucius Institute related at all, but there just happened to be like a Chinese teacher who came for a semester. As I don't really know how it happened, but she came to my high school and taught, and I wasn't in her class, but they had her come to like all the different classes to like kind of speak about something. And I remember this whole thing about the one child policy coming up. And how she was kind of like, well, yeah, there's a one-child policy, but, I support the one-child policy. I'm only going to have one kid. She had a kid already, and she was like, I'm only going to have one kid because it's being patriotic, So, and, in that classroom environment in high school, like, it's also kind of like you're not really going to challenge the teacher.
I feel like you were a very different student than Matt and I.
Oh yeah, I never had a high school teacher that I didn't challenge on like multiple levels.
Yeah, but it's a little different when it's like a foreign teacher and she's being brought around to like, almost like a show and tell kind of thing, and you're supposed to be polite. You know what I mean? Like there's this extra.
So when you were supposed to be polite, you reacted by actually being polite.
Yes.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah, this explains a lot of the difference between you and me, Matt.
Yes.
But that's just like, I had kind of forgotten about this until now, but like, yeah, this whole thing where like, just by what she had internalized herself as like, having one child is patriotic, right, to the Chinese, to her like homeland, and then like kind of expressing that to this high school of like people who didn't know a lot about China, it completely like whitewashed what happened with the one child policy and all of the like babies who were killed and all these things.
The forced abortions, the forced sterilizations.
Yeah, but like she wasn't doing it purposely, and it wasn't like people were purposely trying to like cover it up, but that was the effect that it had.
So, you mentioned, Chris, the idea that the Chinese Communist Party is now invading with money, which makes me think of like what the Communist Party had tried to do to Taiwan. And this is kind of like up until Tsai Ing-wen took over in 2016 as president.
Yeah.
But like there was that period where it kind of seemed like the economies of mainland China and Taiwan were like integrating more and more.
Undermining Joe, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was
Right.
really something that started in the 90s, because before that you couldn't even
Have flights,
travel.
right? You have to go through Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's also what the Communist Party has been trying to do to Hong Kong since 1997. And it turned out that trying to bring more money to Hong Kong did not convince Hong Kongers to give up their freedoms.
No, I mean,
that's-
although there is a certain class of Hong Kong people who are, more dependent on
The Carrie Lam class.
Yeah.
the Carrie Lam class. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of Carrie Lam, Chris, actually, we have something for you.
Oh, yeah?
Remember when I got you guys these Christmas presents?
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. She's got a gun.
And we had forgotten because it took so long.
Oh, my gosh.
Actually,
this
I
one's-
thought about
yeah.
these
Let
and
me
I was
show
like,
this up on the camera.
So
You see that?
Yeah.
we'll have
This
to.
perfectly encapsulates Carrie Lam.
It's actually, if you read it, it's not Carrie Lam.
Oh, it's Carefree Lamb because she's got a gun.
Yeah, so totally different.
What
totally
are the other
not.
ones?
So it's
Totally not something that's illegal under the national security law in any way.
Here, let me get some more of these onto the things. Hey, press, this was us.
yeah.
Frontline reporter.
And then here's the
Oh, wow. And frontline protester.
Yeah,
Wow.
so at the end of like, I think on our last podcast in like 2019, I told you guys I had like bought these as part of a Kickstarter.
Oh, yeah. Funded on Kickstarter.
Yeah, that was this company that was making these Lego-ish,
Lego compatible.
yes,
Yeah.
figurines from the Hong Kong protests,
This is Carrie Lam.
deconstructed.
Deconstructed.
That's very modern.
Very.
Yeah, but like I had you guys pick which ones you
Hey,
wanted.
there's her eye. Which one did I select?
You selected Carrie Lam.
Yes. Past Chris and present Chris are united. Oh, cool. And
Yeah.
it's got an instruction booklet.
All right. So we'll have to spend some time assembling those.
Definitely.
Probably not on the podcast. That would be very boring
We
for the
could do
listeners.
a live stream.
A live stream.
Instead of a let's play, just like assembling the Lego slowly.
Yeah.
Probably
But,
not as fun.
Speaking of a live stream, I'm also considering us doing a live stream of the new Call of Duty Cold War.
Oh.
Let us know if you'd like to see that.
Yeah.
It would require some technical finagling, but that could
Yeah,
be fun.
I don't know how to play that game, but
I've
It's
never
a
played
video game. They're
you shoot people,
yeah.
I believe, right? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I've never played like Call of Duty, and I'm terrible at first-person shooters. So this will be entertaining.
But I saw the trailer, and it had like these clips from Yuri Bezmenov, who talked about, he's like the Russian,
He was an
the Soviet
ex-KGB.
defector. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I assume the game is where you shoot the dirty reds.
I know you don't like that word, Shelley.
I'm using a historical term.
The perfectly clean reds. Does that make you feel better?
Yes, that's the problem. The perfectly clean reds. Thank you.
Just the reds.
welcome.
We don't have to talk about their state of hygiene.
That's a good point.
How
The slightly
angry Boston
malnourished
fans.
reds. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of reds were malnourished, especially under Stalin and Mao. So at any rate,
How do we segue out of this one, guys?
I think we
don't
just
know.
have to end this episode.
I just want to play with my Uncle Plastic. Uncle Plastic.
You know, I thought they were just never going to come. Like, I thought about them the other day, and I was like, huh, what the? And then, like, I just got a package from Hong Kong last night.
Yeah. Well, you know what's sad about this is like between the time when you ordered it and the time when they arrived, Hong Kong has changed so much that like it's
Yeah.
almost like these are relics of the past now.
This isn't a joke. Actually, yeah, you could not do this legally in Hong Kong anymore.
Probably not. I mean, I don't really know how they've come up. Like, I don't think there's been a case yet about whether satire or whatever would, how that would be judged under the national security law. I'm pretty sure if this was like some kind of like terrible thing about Xi Jinping, though.
But what about holding up blank pieces of paper? It's kind of like satire.
Yeah,
right?
I think this would not fly.
Yeah, I mean, like people were arrested, but nobody's gone to trial yet over that. So we don't know how the Hong Kong judicial system is going to try to deal with it.
We don't, but also remember that for the 2014 umbrella movement, people in many cases weren't charged with anything for 2 years.
Yeah.
Or more.
Yeah. So it's kind of hard to say, and again, it's going to be a lot more political than related to the actual crime itself.
Yeah, I get the sense though that the Chinese Communist Party wants to complete this crackdown pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, one of the problems is, like, remember when we had Peter Dallin on, and he was saying that when people are arrested for political crimes, what the government doesn't want is for people to know what they did. Like, because if you actually say the things that they, like, this person, held up a blank piece of paper, or this person created Lego compatible bricks about the protest movement, like, those are clearly not illegal things by any standard of a free country. And so, like, those things can't come out. But I guess we'll have to wait and see, won't we?
I haven't been listening. I've just been looking at my toys.
All right, it's gone on too long. I think now we need to wrap up and start assembling our Legos.
Yes. Thank you for watching China Unscripted. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
See you next time.